Next installment of decolonization is taking a look at the Middle East. And the Middle East, of course, is going to be a region that comprises an awful lot of land. If we look at this map of the world, basically the Middle East would be what's also known as Southwest Asia. And we would be looking at things from the Arabian Peninsula on up through Iran, or what was also historically known as Persia, Mesopotamia, which would be, of course, Iraq, the Levant, which is part of like Syria, also Asia Minor, which is Turkey. Egypt is also considered part of the Middle East. And so this region has an awful lot of things going on here. Historically speaking, you have a huge crossroads of trades and people. When you've had empires rising and falling, this has been a key pivotal part of the world. And coming after World War I, what you have is a good chunk of the Middle East were the remaining pieces and parts of the Ottoman Empire, which finally collapses after 1918 or 1919 after the World War I. So to get started here, it's important to understand some of the important elements that rise to the independence of the Middle East, and also some issues that develop with the new states themselves. With the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, really all bets are off, and you have a lot of nationalist movements throughout this region of very diverse people who want to go their own way. That is going to be tempered, of course, with the wants of European countries such as the British and the French. We're going to be looking at issues of the Cold War that will be coming in with the Soviet expansion. The Soviet Union, again, still wants warm water ports. And when you have a lot of upheaval and weakness in these warm water areas, it's very tempting for the Soviet Union to come on down south to take over. You have issues with the mandate system after World War I, where the French and British basically renege on promises to provide independence for these countries after World War I and pretty much colonize them in the auspices of a mandate system. If that's not enough, you do have the issues of Zionism, which is going on in Europe at this time, as well as the Balfour Declaration and a kind of promise of Israel, but not really, but yes. And what do you do then with Palestine, where you have people moving in to create a new country at a place that's been pretty well set up and occupied by other people? So the first thing we want to look at then is going to be World War I and the immediate years afterwards. What happens here is these many parts of the Ottoman Empire want independence and they want to go their own way. And the idea was that during this time of war, the French and British kind of promised independence to them after the war was over, since they were part of the Ottoman Empire. And when time comes for this freedom, it doesn't happen. What happens is the French and British make agreements amongst themselves about what to do. And when these countries are being formed, what's known as a mandate system, which is basically a colony, the idea is that European countries will groom them to independence when Europe sees them as being ready. So what happens in the meantime then is going to be a series of puppet kings and puppet leaders who really answer to France and Britain and not really to the greater good of their own country. You are going to also notice in places like Mesopotamia, Iraq, and Iran, you have a lot of oil. And it just so happens that these countries that are rich in oil will make very favorable deals to European oil companies. And Britain and France are really kind of big in what's going on here. It's seen by many as being a betrayal. One of the key things that does lead to the development of the mandate system was known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. Now remember, when we get into World War I, it was secret agreements that got Europe sucked into a big problem. And one of the other things that came up with Wilson's 14 points in 1917 was the idea that you can't have secret alliances and you can't have secret deals about places because it only ends in bad things for people. Well, during this time, of course, the British and French, unbeknownst to anyone else, was actually sitting down and negotiating how they wanted to divvy up the Middle East. And this creates some serious issues. And what we're going to be noticing then is the French and the British will each take various areas. The British will take what will be mostly a good part of today's Iraq as well as parts of Iran. And the French took what would be today's parts of Syria and Jordan and places like that up in the Middle East. And they divided it up. People in these territories really don't know what's going on. They're expecting to get freedom. So they're going to be fully betrayed. When you get to a place like Turkey, Turkey is going to be formed officially in 1923, and Turkey is going to really do an awful lot to realize a Turkish identity rather than an Arabian identity. And when you see Kemal Ataturk, who is going to be the founding leader of the country, you're going to see the embrace of Turkish rather than Arabic. You'll see things being translated over to Turkish using the Greco-Roman alphabet rather than the Arabic script. And you also see a lot of modernization and rights and freedoms for women, which are pretty unparalleled in the Middle East and also even parts of Europe. So that's going to be an interesting development to see too. In Iran, you're going to see the rise of a person's name is Reza Khan. And Reza Khan will take control in 1921 and declare himself a Shah, or a king. And what he's going to set up is going to be what's known as the Pahlavi dynasty. And this is going to be a dynasty that's going to be in charge until the late 70s. And what Khan will do then is really look to modernize Iran and secularize Iran and really strip out a religious identity to make more of a modern Western-style state. And what Iran will do during this time then is make a lot of agreements and concessions to Western oil companies and support their business. Which will be a big deal because as time goes on, oil becomes an increasingly hugely important part of economies, war machines, and everything else. And so British and American interests will be the first to get in there to try to get their claims at a good price and be able to take the oil out. And this will be very important for World War II because this oil is going to be running the tanks and the planes and whatever else. And so both the Germans and the British and French and Americans want to make sure that they have full control and access of the region. Germany during World War II will go through and try to promise independence to these countries that were jilted by the French and the British in exchange for concessions in that. But Germany does lose World War II, so can't really deliver what was promised. If we go around some other parts of the Middle East, we have Palestine. And Palestine is going to be, again, the home to what would be today's Israel. And what we see here is going to be the creation of Israel as one of the first acts of the United Nations in 1948, which was a very unpopular move for many Middle Eastern countries. And almost immediately after the formation of Israel in 1948, Israel is invaded by all of its neighbors. What also makes things a little bit more complicated with Israel is that the Balfour Declaration in 1917 kind of promises the development of a Jewish state, but puts in a wording that says that it can only happen as long as it doesn't negatively impact Palestine, which is kind of speaking out of both sides of the mouth. And during this time of the 1917 to 1940s, you see many Jewish people leaving Europe and moving into Israel and really just swelling up the population. And so as time goes on then, Palestinians kind of become refugees in what had been the territories which they had lived in for a very long time. And then you start seeing movement of settlers into other territories that were Palestinian occupying that territory. So the way that everything kind of unfolds and unravels is really unorganized. It's not really seen by any country. There are some people who kind of promise things, but they don't deliver it. And it creates a lot of ambiguity and also a lot of unhappiness for many people. When you go to Iraq, Iraq is going to have a party that's known as the Ba'ath Party take control in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, the Ba'ath Party is also going to be bringing secularism to Iraq, just like secularism had been brought into Iran for many years. And one of the key leaders emerging in the 1970s will be Saddam Hussein. And what's going to happen is he'll come to power in the 70s and decide that when things are going kind of crazy in Iran, because Iran's going to have a revolution in 1979, Iraq tries to go to war with Iran to try to take over land, territory, as well as oil. And what's going to happen now is you're going to have some nationalistic movements going on between Iraq and Iran. And you also have some religious components in that Iraq's going to be Sunni and Iran is a Shiite country. In the 1980s, there's a very nasty war between the Iraqi and Iran. And what ended up happening was neither side's really won it, and Iraq really leaves it with an awful lot of debt. So what's going to happen then with Iraq in the 1980s and 1990s is Saddam needs cash quick. Saddam will go ahead and invade Kuwait, try to get the oil and the money there. That led to the Gulf War of the 90s. You then had sanctions that were put on Saddam Hussein for many years, and then about 10, 12 years ago, after 9/11, you do see the United States go in and put Saddam out of power and rebuild its democracy. Going back to Iran, real quick, in 1950, of course, the United States will support the Shah to rule over Iran. And like I had mentioned just a couple minutes ago, in 1979, there was actually an Iranian revolution. And what's going to happen is the Shah was America's guy. And the Shah was seen by many people as being very brutal and very oppressive to people who did not support his programs or support the wants of the West. And so in 1979, you see the Ayatollah Khomeini and fundamentalist clerics, they actually overthrow the Shah and the Shah's government, and they establish Iran as the Islamic State. And that's been the state of Iran since 1979 on. And if you've ever seen the news, Iran has officially a very anti-American stance. And this is due in large part to the complicity of the United States with the Shah for many years, and also seen as the greed of the Western companies and interests who really took a lot of wealth out of Iran for their own wants and needs. So what's going to happen here then is a lot of changes in Iraq, in the Middle East, and a lot of it's been pretty disjointed. It certainly has not been organized. It certainly has not been peaceful, and it certainly has not been done in a way that's constructive to the wants and the needs of the people. You have a tremendously diverse area in terms of culture, religion, history, background, nationalities, and whatever else. And there was a promise of this independence and a reformation of this region after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And the French and British really stopped that from happening with the mandate system. Even a country like Iraq was actually 3 different countries that was kind of forced into one state as it is today, and that's part of Iraq's problems right now. When you have Iran, you have the Shah that was working very closely with the West in a very high-flying, Western, secularized type of society that gets overthrown by the clerics, and it's a very unique revolution. You see the development of Israel out of Palestine in a way that, by many people's accounts, was kind of controversial, but at the same time, there's some pretty real needs about the development of an Israel. You see the United States come in and being the guarantor of Israel, and then there's a lot of conflicts and war that go on there. We haven't even talked about Egypt, which is going through its own changes in that. And what's happening is really kind of a tussle in the Middle East between a traditional society realizing the nationalism of the people themselves, having a kind of an acrimonious negative relationship with the West for many years, and then you have the complication of a very vital resource such as oil. What do you do with that too? So still a work in progress, and still a lot of things going on in the Middle East. You certainly see this in news, but this is a little bit of the background of it from about 1917 to about the beginnings of the 21st century. Thanks for listening.